Welcome to Managing Care Quality with the Qualitizer Process. I'm Leslie Shaw, and in this episode, I'm talking about the coming changes to CQC's Single Assessment Framework. There's a lot of conversations taking place at the moment about further changes potentially coming down the line for the CQC's inspection process. And it's not surprising that this is creating a renewed sense of uncertainty across the sector. Recent updates from CQC suggest a shift towards a more structured framework, moving from 34 quality statements to around 24 key lines of inquiry. Inspection is expected to place greater emphasis on observation and lived experience, with less reliance on paperwork, alongside shorter, more direct reports. And there's also likely to be a clearer guidance on what good and outstanding look like. And while these changes may alter how inspections feel, the core expectation around safe, well-led and person-centred care remains the same. Now, many registered managers and providers seem to be asking the same questions. What actually matters right now? What is likely to change over the next couple of years? And where should services realistically focus their limited time, energy and resources? And anyone who has worked in social care for a while will recognise this pattern. Just when you feel that you've begun to understand the current system, another discussion about changes begins. New terminology appears, different approaches to inspections are suggested, and the regulatory landscape starts to feel uncertain again. And it's easy in these moments for managers to feel that everything is shifting beneath their feet. What is slightly different this time is that some of the recent updates are beginning to provide a clearer direction of travel. There has been discussion about moving away from the current set of quality statements towards a more structured set of key lines of inquiry, those CLOEs that many of us are familiar with, and reducing the number from 34, which we have in the current single assessment framework, to around 24. And for many in the sector, it will feel like a return to something more familiar. Alongside this, there's indications that inspection reports may become shorter, but more practical, and that inspection activity may place greater emphasis on observations and engagement with people, rather than relying so heavily on documentation alone. And some have described this as a more of a 80-20 approach, with a stronger focus on what's actually happening day to day within the service. And there is also ongoing discussion around rating characteristics, which, if introduced, clearly could provide a more consistent definition of what outstanding, good, requires improvement, and inadequate actually look like in practice. And that helps registered managers to move up the quality ladder in a more sustainable and structured way. And supporting questions have also been mentioned, although at this stage, it's not entirely clear how these will be applied. And all of this can understandably create a sense of things are shifting again. However, when you step back from the noise and look at the bigger picture, the situation is actually far more reassuring than many people think. If we look at the current reality across the sector, the overall picture has not changed as dramatically as some of the conversations that are happening might suggest. In fact, around 2/3 of services are currently rated good or outstanding. Although that does mean that there are more than 2,000 services rated requiring improvement or inadequate. And that's broadly where the sector was several years ago. This in itself tells us something quite important, I think. Good services are still good services. The fundamentals that underpin quality have not suddenly changed. Strong leadership, safe care delivery, and effective governance remain at the heart of a well-run care service. And what does appear to be becoming more noticeable during inspections, however, is the increasing attention being given to governance and how effectively that works in practice. When inspectors identify areas of non-compliance, particularly in relation to safety or governance, this often has a direct impact on the well-led rating. In other words, weaknesses in governance are becoming much more visible during the inspection process, and I would think that that will continue to be the case. Inspectors are looking closely at whether systems genuinely support improvements or whether they simply exist on paper. And this is something I see repeatedly when working alongside services. Audits are completed, action plans are written, policies regularly updated. On the surface, everything seems to be in place. However, the question inspectors often ask is much simpler than many people expect. Has anything actually improved as a result? I think the areas that inspectors are continuing to focus on when we move beyond the discussions about frameworks and terminology, something really important becomes clear. The core areas inspectors focus on have remained remarkably consistent for many years. And although language may evolve and the inspection process may adapt, and the fundamental expectations around quality of care have not suddenly changed, safety continues to sit very firmly at the centre of inspections. Inspectors want to understand how well risks are identified, assessed, and managed in day-to-day practice. And this includes the quality of risk assessments themselves, but how incidents are reviewed, and most importantly, whether learning is genuinely taking place. Many services will report incidents appropriately, but inspectors often look beyond the initial report. They want to see whether this service has reflected on what's happened, whether patterns are recognised, and whether changes are introduced to prevent similar situations occurring again, and how those changes are not just introduced, but are reviewed and reflected on and learned. In other words, good governance. Medicine management is another area that continues to appear regularly in inspection findings, and systems often appear straightforward, but when inspectors look closely, they're frequently identifying gaps in recording or inconsistencies in practice. Those creams in individual bedrooms that haven't been marked with the open date or are not stored correctly. Simple mistakes that risk your care service being marked down. And governance, I've mentioned it before, but it remains a central theme. Inspectors want to see clear evidence that systems designed to monitor quality are actually driving improvement, not simply documenting activities. So the classic monthly weights recording in a residential setting. Are you just recording the weights? Or can you demonstrate a process where weights are fed into updated risk assessments, they're fed into reviewed care planning, they're fed into mealtime experiences, they're fed into reviews of the meals that are supplied and delivered? Are they fed into referrals by the GP to the SALT team? What activities are you using to evidence good governance? And alongside good governance, there is also growing attention on culture and leadership. Staffing stability, training, and leadership behaviours all influence how inspectors understand the overall strength of a service. And there's also continued focus on rights-based care and lawful practice, particularly in relation to the Mental Capacity Act and deprivation of liberty safeguards, and the appropriate use of restrictive practices. When you step back and you look at these themes together, most experienced registered managers will recognise them immediately. None of these are new areas. So let's home in on what's unlikely to change. Amid all the conversations about change, there is also an important and reassuring message for providers and registered managers. The fundamental structure of the inspection system is very unlikely to disappear. The 5 key questions remain central. Services are still being assessed on whether care is safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well-led. And the rating system remains the same. Services will continue to be rated outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. And the fundamental standards continue to underpin everything inspectors look for. When all the discussion about frameworks is stripped back, the core question remains very simple. Can the service demonstrate that care is safe, effective, person-centred, and supported by strong leadership and good governance? So what may evolve with all of this change and review? While much of the structure does remain familiar, some aspects of inspection are clearly evolving. The potential return of key lines of inquiry, the CLOEs, alongside the introduction of supporting questions, suggesting a move towards a more structured and possibly more navigable framework. And there's also increasing use of technology with inspections, including automation, remote activity, and AI-supported approaches to gathering and analysing information. Now, at the same time, there appears to be a renewed emphasis on those common sense questions. Is care safe? Is care personalised? And a stronger intention to actively recognise good care rather than focusing only on where things are going wrong. And these shifts may change how inspections feel, but they do not change what good care looks like. So where should registered managers be focusing now? With all of this in mind, the most helpful question for managers to consider is where their focus should realistically sit right now. And the most important thing in a service can ever do is to develop a clear and honest understanding of its current level of compliance. So strong services work hard to understand their own gaps well before an inspector ever arrives. And they ensure that governance systems are genuinely driving improvements and that evidence of safety, of quality and leadership oversight is visible. Now, they may involve teams in understanding what good practice looks like in real situations, not just in policies. And when that happens, compliance becomes part of everyday practice rather than something prepared for an inspection. So let's bring it back to the key question. When everything is brought together, it comes back to one simple question. If an inspector walked through your door tomorrow, could you confidently demonstrate that your care is safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well-led? And for some services, the answer is clear. For others, it feels a little less certain. Not because the care is not good. I don't think it's often that. But because the connection between what is happening day to day and how that is evidenced is not always clear. And all of this is one reason why I run the SAF Sprint, Single Assessment Framework Sprint. and it's run over 1 month, and it's designed to help registered managers step back and focus on how their service aligns with the CQC single assessment framework. And we focus on key areas of inspection that inspectors from CQC are paying close attention to. So we look at governance with you, we look at safe staffing and how service teams can evidence improvement. Now, the aim of the SAF sprint is definitely not to add more work, but it's to create clarity so that the good work already happening in your service can be demonstrated with confidence. If inspection readiness has been on your mind recently, you're very welcome to join the next SAF sprint. And the best thing, there's no charge. You just sign up, commit to working through 3 key question statements and knowing that at the end of the month, you have moved your service forward in a positive way. Because services that are inspection ready are not necessarily doing more than everyone else. They're simply focusing on the right things in the right way with the right level of clarity. So if you would like to join our next SAF sprint, you can click down below in the comments and find the link to take you to the sign up page, or you could head across to our website, www.registeredcaremanager.co.uk. So that's all for now. I hope that's been helpful. I really don't want people to be stressing about all the noise that they're hearing that changes are coming again. You all do an amazing job. I think as registered managers, having been one for many years and working with so many hundreds of registered managers, I know we always do our best every day. So keep doing that, and I'll see you next week in the next episode of Qualitizer Process Care Quality Management. Bye for now.